Hello and thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Here's a look at some of the stories we've been covering for you today. With the Consumer Price Index reaching a 31-year high, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell says inflation should no longer be referred to as transitory. He also warns the new Omicron variant could hurt the economy. Today, a landmark case was heard by the Supreme Court that will have long-lasting implications on Roe v. Wade. The pro-life movement was a major presence in Washington, D.C. as the justices heard the case. More than 100 volunteers decorated the White House, and dozens of Christmas trees and thousands of ornaments. But public tours are still suspended because of the CCP virus pandemic. The Supreme Court heard the case on Mississippi's abortion law on Wednesday. It could be a chance for the court to revisit Roe v. Wade. We spoke to some lawmakers to get their view, including State Representative Becky Curry from Mississippi, who introduced the law.
Well, I wrote this bill in 2018, and I always knew that this was a special bill. And I'm so proud. Of course, we didn't know that it was coming before the Supreme Court at that time when we passed it, a bipartisan bill in Mississippi. And here we are. And we have a chance to save millions of babies, and I'm so excited about it.
Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith said that she just doesn't think that any court could ignore the scientific facts presented in the case by the state of Mississippi.
Well, you know, we're talking about viability, the ability to live outside the womb, and the evidence is extremely strong. You know, we have a lot of science since 1973. Science is definitely on our side.
Senator Steve Daines says that this case offers an opportunity to change the trajectory of this country.
Overturning Roe v. Wade returns this decision back to the states. So the states then can decide what they want to do as it relates to protecting the unborn, instead of 9 men in black robes that decided that for us back in 1973.
The oral arguments of this Mississippi case, Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health Organization, started today, and it is regarded as the most significant abortion case the Supreme Court has overseen since its ruling in the 1973 Roe versus Wade trial. The Supreme Court now has a 6-3 conservative majority, so it has a chance to reverse the historic ruling in the Roe versus Wade case. With the Supreme Court hearing the landmark case that will decide the future of Roe v. Wade, we spoke to the president at Intercessors for America, David Kubal, to find out where we go from here. Here's a look at our sit-down interview. David Kubal, thank you so much for joining us in the Capitol Report.
It's my pleasure.
Now, David, the Supreme Court is going to be deliberating on this very important case that could potentially reverse Roe v. Wade. Where do you see this going? Tell us a little bit about.
Well, Steve, thanks for the opportunity for me to share with you and the audience. This is a very critical case. You know, since Roe has been passed, over 60 million babies have been aborted, and it's just been a very unfortunate situation for our nation and for men and women of faith, such as myself and those hundreds of thousands of people I represent at Intercessors for America. We believe that the shedding of innocent blood puts a judgment upon our country that has real consequences. So Roe needs to be reversed, absolutely.
Now, from what I understand, you guys also may have filed an amicus brief within this case. Tell us about that.
We sure did, yeah. We had the privilege to work with a really incredible team of attorneys to present, for the first time in judicial history, an amicus brief that presented a biblical legal argument for life. First time in the history of the country. And it's so cool that we had the opportunity as a part of this brief to invite intercessors from around the nation to sign on to this so that the justices and their clerks would see the hundreds of thousands of people that are involved in this organization praying for them that they would make the right decision.
Now, you touched upon this, a little bit earlier, I think. When it comes to the Supreme Court justices coming to a decision, tell us a little bit how you think in the timeline with that, the most important time for people to.
Sure. Well, if tradition holds, what usually happens is the justices will hear the different cases throughout the week. And then on Friday, they will conference confidentially, just them, and they will decide who is going to write the majority opinion, who's going to write the minority opinion. They will actually cast their ballots to each other. So really, within a matter of a few days after that hearing is over, the justices will know amongst themselves what the decision is, and then the clerks join in the justices and beginning to write the opinions.
Now, is it possible for them to potentially change their decision? Has there been any historical precedent?
Yeah, there is. Of course, a lot of these things are confidential and go on behind the scenes, but I have heard stories of justices making their decision on the Friday in that conference, and then weeks and months later that they make a different decision. And some of the cases, in fact, I understand that Roe went this way, that it actually turned the outcome of the case. Initially in the conference, Roe did not prevail, but after a number of months, one of the justices changed their heart, changed their mind, and Roe prevailed.
Now, just, from your own perspective, how strong of a case, how likely of a case do you think this will be to come out the way that you would like to see?
Yeah, that's a great question, Steve. Well, first of all, let's face the fact that the law in 1973 was based on an arbitrary date set in time, 24, 23 weeks, where they determined that life was viable. Now listen to the definition of viability. It's a false definition. They determined that a viable fetus, a viable baby, has to be viable outside of the womb. Well, even at that time, they knew that the technology would change, as it has. So here we are nearly 50 years later, the technology has changed. But let me just tell you what, men and women of faith, we believe that a baby is viable, sustainable in the womb from the point of conception. Just leave it alone. They have forced upon us, the leftists forced upon us, this false definition of viability to cause us to think about whether it's 8 weeks or 15 weeks or whatever. The fact of the matter is, a fetus, a baby is viable from the point of conception in the mother's womb. Just leave it alone.
David Cabal, thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
This morning, right outside of the Supreme Court, religious groups gathered to pray for the justices to have wisdom and discretion as these hearings play out. NTD's Melina Wisecup spoke with some of the people outside of the court to hear their thoughts on this historic case.
Here we are right outside of the Supreme Court yet again, where people from across the nation have gathered to either support abortion rights or oppose abortion rights. We spoke to people from both sides to figure out what their views are and why they stand by those views.
So if the court gets rid of the viability line, there will be no stopping point, and states will rush in to try and ban abortion at virtually any point in pregnancy. And we may well see 20 states or more doing that.
If the court rules conservatively, half the country could start passing laws to ban abortions. And that's exactly what pro-life advocates are hoping for. That state after state will start passing new laws to protect the unborn.
Like heartbeat bills, like bills banning abortions on children that have Down syndrome, or sex selection abortions. These will move forward. So this is a historic moment. We are extremely optimistic. I think clearly we will win the Dobbs case outright.
The stakes have never been higher for the fate of federal abortion laws. And pro-choice activists tell us they're concerned that this ruling will result in fewer and fewer states giving women access to safe abortions. And they're prepared to fight back.
Our work is going to be to make that access available to other people. For folks who are in the states where it's not protected, it's going to be to help people get to that access. I have seen people's lives be helped by abortion. I don't see any reason for any of us to make someone else's life harder. I think that that's an absurd way to live.
But others argue that life doesn't have to be harder for women with unwanted pregnancies, so long as resources go towards helping mothers care for their babies instead of getting rid of them.
And so women deserve better than abortion. They deserve hope-filled solutions, life-affirming care, quality and compassionate support. And we, on a daily basis, are providing quality care to women facing unexpected pregnancies and professional care. And so we already have established that there's not going to be mass chaos.
And some tell us they're opposed to the abortion bans because they fear it may lead states to go overboard and deny access to procedures that are medically necessary.
She found found out that the baby had passed away, the fetus. And she had to have a DNC. In some of these new regulations and laws that they're trying to pass, a DNC is an abortion. So she would have had to wait till that baby expelled itself or killed her.
Many people from both sides are expecting the justices to rule conservatively and uphold the ban on abortions after 15 weeks, leaving pro-choice activists to hold the line in their own states, while pro-life advocates pray for a wave of heartbeat bills to flood across the states. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
First Lady Jill Biden unveils the White House's holiday decorations. More than 100 volunteers decorated the White House with dozens of Christmas trees and thousands of ornaments. The official Christmas tree is trimmed with white doves and ribbons with the names of all 50 states and territories. Gifts from the Heart is the theme represented in each of the public rooms of the White House. But fewer people are less likely to see the decked-out mansion in person this year, with public tours still suspended because of the continued threat from the CCP virus. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell faced a grilling on mounting inflationary pressure during a Senate hearing on Tuesday. He says it's time to retire the word transitory from the inflation narrative.
Inflation has run well above 2% for long enough that if you look back a few years, inflation averages 2%. So we tend to use it to mean that it won't leave a permanent mark in the form of higher inflation. I think it's probably a good time to retire that word and try to explain more clearly what we mean.
The Fed expects that inflation will move down significantly over the next year as supply chain issues ease. But Powell also notes that factors pushing inflation higher would stick around well into next year. Even though not much is known about the new Omicron variant, Powell warns that this new variant of the CCP virus has the potential to damage the economy. President Biden gave remarks on the economy today. Biden also met with CEOs of major retailers earlier this week to discuss the supply chain crisis amid rising prices and empty shelves.
I've also spoken with the CEOs of UPS and FedEx, which are on track to deliver more packages than ever. Now, I can't promise that every person will get every gift they want on time. Only Santa Claus can keep that promise. But there are items every year that sell out that are hard to find.
The traffic at ports does seem to be improving, but there still remains long wait times for loading shipping containers. The Consumer Price Index reached a 31-year high to about 6%, and the price of food went up over 5% this year. Black Friday online sales and Cyber Monday sales are both slightly below 2020 levels, while physical store traffic increased significantly from last year, yet still well below pre-pandemic levels. The first case of the CCP virus variant Omicron has been detected in California. We speak to frontline emergency room Dr. Omar Hamada to see where we stand and if there could be major cause for concern. On Tuesday, a federal judge blocked President Biden's COVID-19 vaccine mandate for federal contractors. And earlier this week, a federal judge halted the vaccine mandate for healthcare workers in 10 states across the country. The Centers for Disease Control, or CDC, has recommended that all adults should get a COVID-19 booster shot due to the emergence of the new Omicron variant. The first case of the CCP virus variant Omicron was detected in California today. Officials said Wednesday the patient traveled from South Africa on November 22nd and tested positive for the CCP virus a week later. Scientists with the CDC confirmed the case was caused by the variant. The World Health Organization recommends people over 60 years old postpone travel in the wake of the new Omicron variant. The CDC said in a statement that everyone 18 and older should get a booster shot 6 months after the second dose of Pfizer or Moderna's vaccine, or 2 months after the single dose of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Before that, the CDC only advised those over 50 or living in a long-term care facility to get a booster. President Biden called Omicron a cause for concern, not a cause for panic. He is going to release a plan this Thursday on how his administration will combat the CCP virus over the winter. Dr. Omar Hamada is an emergency room doctor who has been on the front lines in the battle against the CCP virus. We're happy to have Dr. Hamada on with us today to discuss the latest variant and the overall state of the virus. Dr. Omar Hamada, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be here.
Now, Doctor, you are working on the front lines in the emergency room and literally have your finger on the pulse of the virus. I want to ask you about the latest variant that has emerged, but first, prior to the emergence of this new variant, what would you say was the state of the pandemic overall, and was it under control?
You know, over the past month, Steve, we've seen a tremendous regression of the number of cases coming into the emergency room. When it first started last year, of course, there was a lot of fear on the front end because we didn't know what to expect, and a lot of us thought, this could be it for us. But as we gained more experience, we actually saw that though it was fatal for a certain segment of the population, it wasn't as bad for most people. Then with the advent of the immunization, I think it provided a bit more protection, though not perfect. We had another upswing with the Delta variant that was more severe than even initially. Maybe not more cases, but certainly more fatalities. We began to see younger patients affected and more serious disease. But over the past month or so, it's almost come to a screeching halt. I'd say, the past week, I can probably count on one hand the number of COVID cases I've seen. As compared to before, it was 20 or 30 a day just by myself every time I was in the ER.
Now, why do you think it is that we're seeing these new variants popping up?
Viruses mutate a lot, especially when they feel what we call pressure, external pressures, because they want to survive, or they're trying to survive, and continue to infect a host to continue to replicate and spread. So there's some theory that with the vaccine, there's been some external pressure that has induced some variant, manipulations with the wild-type virus. But we really don't know. I mean, they naturally mutate, but perhaps the vaccinations worldwide are now actually increasing that pressure and causing more mutations.
Now, how dangerous is this new Omicron variant? Do we even know yet, or is it still too early to tell?
Well, we've had many different variants. I think the Delta was the one that was the most noticeable because of the effects that it had. But we're now at Omicron. I think we've skipped a couple of letters, but there have been even more than that. So with this one, I think what we saw was just an uptick in the number of infections. So it scared a lot of people because now this one is more transmissible and more infectious. But what we're seeing, at least in South Africa, what the physicians there are relaying to us, is that the disease severity is minimal. They say it's about as bad as a mild common cold. So though we're seeing an uptick in number of people affected, the severity of disease seems to be at this point minimal, so it shouldn't really cause much of a problem. And in fact, it may actually provide more natural immunity if the infectivity is greater, but the virulence or severity is less. This may be actually something good in terms of getting people immune to it without necessarily having to depend on a vaccine that's not incredibly effective.
Dr. Hamada, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Steve.
And LeBron James tested positive for the CCP virus on Tuesday afternoon, and he has been placed in the NBA's health and safety protocol indefinitely. James was ruled out for the Los Angeles Lakers game against the Sacramento Kings on Tuesday night. A judge on Tuesday blocked President Biden's COVID-19 vaccine mandate for federal contractors, finding that Biden likely lacks the authority to force them to get vaccinated. A U.S. district judge has wrote in the 29-page order questioning the president's use of congressionally delegated authority to impose vaccine mandates on federal employees. The judge granted a request for a preliminary injunction by the Attorneys General of Kentucky, Ohio, and Tennessee. Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost said in a statement, "This is not about vaccines, it's about mandates." On Monday, a federal judge halted the Biden administration's COVID-19 vaccine mandate for U.S. healthcare workers in 10 states across the country, saying that the Federal Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services did not get approval from Congress to impose the mandate. U.S. District Judge Matthew Shelp, a Trump appointee, said that the CMS lacked the authority and failed to show evidence that vaccination status has a direct impact on spreading COVID in the mandated healthcare facilities. The judge rejected the agency's argument that the COVID-19 pandemic constitutes an emergency because it waited more than 10 months after the vaccines were cleared to impose the mandate. In his ruling, Shelp said that truly the impact of this mandate reaches far beyond COVID and imposes an unprecedented demand to federally dictate the private medical decisions of millions of Americans. The ruling is a temporary injunction as the case goes through the courts. The COVID-19 vaccine mandate deadline for the United States Marine Corps was on November 28th. About 95% of active duty Marines had received at least one COVID-19 vaccine dose by the deadline, but that still leaves nearly 7,400 who have not gotten a shot. And President Biden signed 4 bills affecting military service members and their families at the White House on Tuesday.
But keeping faith with American veterans required much more than laying wreaths or making more oaths. It requires acts.
The bipartisan bills support healthcare workers working in veteran affairs after their active military service ends, requires in-state college tuition to the families of service members who die or become disabled or otherwise cannot receive education benefits, and supports funding for maternity care for women who served in the military. Democrats right now have control of the White House and both chambers of Congress, but their majorities on Capitol Hill are thin, and Republicans are anxiously gearing up their campaigns to flip the House back to red. This week, Republican Conference Chairwoman Elise Stefanik endorsed a handful of candidates, and she told us that she's optimistic for the upcoming midterms.
Very optimistic. Why am I optimistic? Because Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi's agenda has failed America. We are seeing crisis after crisis, issue after issue. Republicans win. The polling shows that. We are not taking it for granted. We have our best candidates ever, and I'm very excited about the opportunity to win back the House.
Only a few seats are needed to give the GOP a majority. All of these candidates are running for seats currently held by Democrats. Carolyn Leavitt is a candidate who served in the White House under the Trump administration. She tells us her mission is waking up the young generation to the malpractices of the Chinese Communist Party and the threat it poses to the free world.
With Confucius Institutes, we have one at the University of New Hampshire in my district, and they are censoring and silencing our voices on social media and via big tech. So these are all issues, again, that my generation doesn't realize. That's why they're all on TikTok, which is Chinese spyware, right? These are issues we need to relay to young people, or we're going to lose our country if we don't.
And if Republicans do take back the House, Stefanik says countering this threat will be among their top priorities.
And we will lead the way in standing for human rights. I also think China needs to be kicked out of organizations like the WHO. I believe that countering China is the most important issue that my generation is going to face.
Mark Meadows, former President Trump's White House chief of staff, has agreed to cooperate with a White House panel investigating the January 6th Capitol breach. Congressman Benny Thompson said in a statement that Meadows has produced records and will soon appear for an initial deposition, but the panel will continue to assess his degree of compliance. The agreement comes after 2 months of negotiations between Meadows and the committee. Meadows' lawyer says this cooperation would not require Meadows to waive executive privilege nor forfeit the long-standing position that senior White House aides cannot be compelled to testify before Congress. The state of Virginia's school enrollment has dropped by 46,000. That's just over a 3.5% drop compared to pre-pandemic levels. The biggest drop is in Fairfax County, losing 10,000 students. Funding is normally based upon enrollment. However, loss in funds has not been significant, according to a spokesperson at the Department of Education. Fairfax County has also been at the center of a controversy where schools have been teaching the Marxist ideology of critical race theory. And that's all we have for you on the Capitol Report today. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Steve Lance, and we'll see you next time.